Good morning, stakeholders, and welcome to the Office of Procurement Regulation session on the rollout of training standards, competency levels, and certification requirements for retention and disposal. I am Tamara Roy, Head Corporate Communications, and we are extremely pleased that you're able to participate in today's session. So the team who will be presenting today are Property Disposal Officer, Ms. Laura Hiralal, and Senior Capacity Development Specialist, Ms. Melissa Ramkumar Singh. But before we begin the formal aspects of today's proceedings, please allow me to go through some helpful tips for a successful session. Do note that your mics will be muted. Your questions during the session can be sent via the chat option on the Teams platform. These questions will be collated by our team and addressed in our question and answer segment at the end of the session. Please keep your contributions helpful and be considerate to our presenters and other participants. At the end of today's session, you will be invited to provide your feedback. So feel free to help us to improve any future sessions to better match your needs by letting us know what worked well and what did not. Please note that this session is being recorded and will be shared via email and uploaded to our website. So without further delay, we will now welcome our first presenter, Ms. Laura Hiralal, who will guide us through the background, purpose, and benefits of the standard. So Ms. Hiralal.
Good morning and welcome to our session on the training standards, competence levels, and certification requirements based on retention and disposal. So on today's agenda, we will be presenting on the following areas. We'll firstly give an introduction to the training standards, then provide some background information, a gap analysis, looking at the benefits of the standard, how the standard is structured, the competence framework and certification requirements, and finally, we would explore the OPR's learning management system and end up with a question and answer segment. So the main objective of today's session is to sensitize you on the training standards, competence levels, and certification requirements as it pertains to the retention and disposal of public property. Please note that this particular training standard can be found on the OPR's website for more information. We will now move on to introducing you briefly to the training standard. What is the role of the OPR in reference to the training standard? Section 13(1)(b) of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act 2015 as amended requires that the OPR set training standards, competence levels, and certification requirements to promote best practice in procurement and by extension retention and disposal of public property. In setting the standard, the OPR's goal is to support the development of retention and disposal capacity, training and dissemination of information, ensuring the effective application of asset management and disposal rules through appropriate mechanisms. We'd firstly provide some context, and so the reality is that emphasis is usually placed on the procurement function alone, but it is of critical importance to highlight that when managing public property, retention and disposal management are quite essential components. Also, it is imperative to note that public property captures both personal as well as real property. As such, the capacity to retain or manage public property requires separate specialized skill set, knowledge, and training when managing personal as opposed to real property. After assets are procured or acquired, managing, monitoring, and maintaining the assets throughout its useful life is a necessary focus. This skill set is captured under retention of public property, more commonly referred to as asset and inventory management. Disposal of public property, on the other hand, requires skills to develop and execute the disposal strategy that provides the best and most feasible option to dispose of items. Therefore, through the retention and disposal of public property systems and procedures, the public sector manages its return on investment through proper management of its property by seeking maximum return on investment upon disposal so as to aid in the achievement of value for money. Also, Building a cadre of practitioners in the field of retention and disposal can translate into real financial benefits. Once equipped with the technical capability to effectively manage same, they can incorporate value-adding activities such as asset disposal planning, revenue or cost control, efficient retention or management of public property, and protection of the environment. Therefore, the purpose of the standard is to identify the knowledge, skills, and competencies required of retention and disposal practitioners in pursuit of a workforce development, improved public confidence, and a globally competitive retention and disposal system. We now turn our attention to identifying and analyzing the gaps within retention and disposal, which will assist those practitioners in the field to identify what are the missing processes, practices, technologies, and skills required within retention and disposal. Here we are able to see the current state as the image shows, which is an unhappy phase due to the issues and challenges that currently exist. The gap analysis allows us to identify the challenges or shortcomings and identify the necessary steps to be taken to help eliminate the gaps, that is, the necessary action plan to take us to the desired state, a happy state. Since once we take the action plan as implemented, this would be the key step to bridge the gap. So let's look at an assessment of the gaps. The following methods and documents assisted in the identification of the challenges faced by public bodies in relation to retention and disposal of public property. And these include report of the Auditor General, the Strategic Plan October 2017 to September 2020 report from Ministry of Public Administration, a white paper 2005 reform of the public sector procurement regime, questionnaires issued to named procurement officers within public bodies, and requests for information letters also issued to public bodies. Therefore, from the gap analysis, the following summarizes the identified challenges in the current retention and disposal system. As such, public bodies are facing insufficient storage space at their facility for items identified for disposal. There is no overarching policy or standard operating procedures for disposal of assets. Information is not readily available. There is no system being used by the ministries to depreciate items each year. There is improper record keeping, making it difficult to determine the current value of items to dispose. Additionally, challenges also faced by some public bodies is that limited funds are allocated to the company to execute disposal, and disposal processes are considered long, tedious, and quite frustrating upon execution. We now move into the rationale for the training standard, which was revealed by the gap analysis, illustrating the importance of capacity building initiatives for setting the training standards, competence levels, and certification requirements to promote best practice in the retention and disposal of public property in Trinidad and Tobago. Also, there are insufficient training standards, educational requirements, and competence framework for retention and disposal practitioners in Trinidad and Tobago. Hence, setting the standards and the requirements are very critical in promoting the retention and disposal function within the public sector. Let us now turn our attention to the benefits of the retention and disposal training standards to you as educational institutions and training providers. So the benefits of the standard is that it identifies skills, knowledge, and competencies for inclusion in retention and disposal curricula. It enables educational institutions or training providers to understand the different levels of competence required by practitioners in the public sector. It assists with recruiting training providers or educational institutions in efficiently and effectively executing the retention and disposal criteria. And it aids the development of high-quality retention and disposal of public property programs by educational institutions or training providers to prepare public service professionals in the field. Let's now move into how the standard is structured. So from this slide, the training standard covers the pillars of retention and disposal, the competence levels, and certification requirements. So firstly, the pillars of retention and disposal will consist of the core knowledge areas and capabilities that public procurement, retention, and disposal practitioners should possess. Secondly, the competence levels are the competencies that describe the ability to use a set of related knowledge, skills, and attributes required to successfully perform activities and tasks in a defined setting. It will enable individuals and employers to better understand and compare the different levels of competence that exist and allow for the mobility of practitioners across public bodies. And finally, the certification requirements are what set the minimum qualification levels for practitioners operating at each competence level. Now we would go through the competence levels. So as previously stated, the competence levels will enable individuals, employers, educational institutions to better understand and compare the different levels that exist and allow for the mobility of practitioners across public bodies. In developing the different competence levels, that is levels 3, 4, and 5, we use the CARICOM qualifications framework as a benchmark. Within the CARICOM qualifications framework, the report identified that level 3 is the diploma or associate degree level, and here we refer to it as a basic level. It also stated that level 4 is the bachelor's degree level, referred to here as the intermediate level, and level 5 as the postgraduate or advanced professional level, referred to as the advanced level here. So for the basic level, practitioners should possess general knowledge and awareness within the field of retention and disposal. These individuals can be buyers, shoppers, inventory, asset management or procurement officers, financial or accounting assistant, or receiving or distribution officer. For the level 4 intermediate level, practitioners should possess training within the field and has the ability to work independently and apply the knowledge in a comprehensive manner. This individual can be a procurement or inventory or asset supervisor, senior procurement officer, maintenance or property officer, or a land administration officer. And level 5, the advanced level, personnel require in-depth knowledge in the field and in-depth experience and the ability to apply knowledge in a strategic manner. This person can be a procurement or asset management officer, chief procurement officer, commercial manager, procurement director, land and buildings manager. So here we have the competence infrastructure as shown on this slide, which gives a brief description of each level of competence. So as we can see here, for level 3, the basic level, the practitioner should possess basic knowledge and awareness of laws, regulations, and guidelines in relation to retention and disposal of public property. They must have an understanding of property or inventory tracking and stores and inventory management systems, and be able to keep proper inventory records and continuously review the level of inventory or property. The practitioner must ensure that data is reconciled to reflect the property records and adjust the records to accommodate discrepancies. This level would be someone who has 2 years work-related experience in a property, stores, or inventory clerk support role with relevant training and possesses a diploma in property, asset, or inventory management. For level 4 practitioners should possess training, the ability to work independently, and apply extensive knowledge of property and inventory management, ensuring that assets are managed according to developed policies and procedures in place and according to laws. They must also possess knowledge of standardized property disposal procedures, regulations, or operations, and have extensive experience in generating reports that vary from simple to complex analysis. A practitioner at this level should have 3 years of experience in the field of property management and/or property disposal, and have, for personal property, a first degree in general property, asset, or inventory management, or a related field, or for real property, a certificate or diploma in property or real estate management, or certificate in land administration or management. And finally, level 5 practitioners would possess in-depth knowledge, experience, and the ability to apply the knowledge in a strategic manner. They would lead the retention and disposal function and support the achievement of the public body's strategic mandate in keeping with the public procurement and disposal of public property legislation, as well as make recommendations for improvements in the performance of their functions. This practitioner should have strategic retention and disposal of property or asset experience and expertise, as illustrated by 8 years of progressive experience in the field. Managing high-risk, high-value property management projects that are of strategic significance to operations and execution of successful property disposal processes would be an asset. This person would also have for personal property a postgraduate degree in procurement or supply chain or property management, or for real property, land administration, real estate, or facilities management, or any other related field. So we now go through the 5 pillars of retention and disposal. So as we can see on the screen, pillar 1 is referred to as governance and compliance. Pillar 2, significant planning. Pillar 3, managing demand. Pillar 4, performance management. And pillar 5, people. These pillars of retention and disposal consist of the core knowledge areas and capabilities that public procurement retention and disposal practitioners should possess, and the areas education and training institutions should ensure are included in their training programs. Now we would go into the competence framework for retention and disposal of public property. The competence framework for retention of public property, personal and real, and disposal of personal property identifies the competencies, that is, the knowledge and the skills that should be captured in training sessions for retention and disposal practitioners at different functional or competence levels. So here, this table identifies the 5 pillars of retention and disposal that make up the competence framework. The table shows the different areas that would be captured under the relevant pillars. So again, pillar 1 in yellow represents governance and compliance. Pillars 2 and 3, which is significant planning and managing demand, have been combined to capture both the retention aspect as seen in orange and the disposal aspect as seen in blue. Pillar 4 is seen in green as performance management, and pillar 5 in purple represents people. So pillar 1 is based upon governance and compliance and focuses on how retention and disposal function are individually coordinated and managed. So before we go into the content, I just give an overview of what the tables going forward would cover. So the tables would identify the focus areas under each pillar and then expand on the knowledge and competencies to be gained at each level, that is levels 3, 4, and 5, which is basic, intermediate, and advanced levels. So the first area we capture under pillar 1 is the legislative framework, where practitioners should be able to demonstrate their knowledge and understanding of the legislative and regulatory framework that governs the retention and disposal of public property in Trinidad and Tobago. Here, practitioners at the different levels should understand the governance requirements that are in compliance with the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act and regulations. We now look at the next heading, which is in knowledge and competencies at each level that is applicable for both retention and disposal. So as such, level 3, which is the basic level, practitioners must have general knowledge and awareness of retention and disposal of public property related legislation and applicable policy, handbooks, and general guidelines for practical application. They must understand the purpose and objectives, as well as the implications and effects of the legislation for the retention and disposal function, and should comply with professional and other applicable codes of conduct and ethical standards. The intermediate level practitioners must understand the process required for good practice and to operate within the legislative framework. They must have the ability to undertake risk assessment activities and ensure compliance with the objects of the Act. Practitioners at this level must ensure that the applicable legislation and its principles are being adhered to in all aspects of retention and disposal of public property, and have the ability to provide recommendations for improvement in internal control procedures and general operations to ensure compliance. The advanced practitioners should display use of expert knowledge gained on legislative framework to interpret legislation and assess the impact upon the management function. They should also be able to develop recommendations for future management procedures, policy, governance, and compliance implications of legislation to ensure full and effective communication and management. They would be able to assess opportunities and risks associated with the given legislation and standards and current retention and disposal of public property practices and processes. And they should also ensure that the functional approach aligns with the wider government's mandate for effective property management practices in Trinidad and Tobago. So after each competence area, I will be given some examples of topics that can be included in developing the training modules for the areas. So for this area, examples of topics that can be covered include structure of the legal framework in Trinidad and Tobago. For example, this would capture the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act and regulations, as well as the corresponding general guidelines and handbooks as developed by the UPR. Another area which also informs governance and compliance is that of internal controls. Internal controls guide the public bodies to achieve their mission or goals and define the way practitioners and stakeholders act as they undertake retention and disposal activities. So basic level practitioners must be aware of ethical conduct throughout the job cycle and adheres to the organizational standards, code of conduct, and values relevant to the level of responsibility. They must also be able to understand the use of internal controls in the retention and disposal of public property. Practitioners must understand the use of mitigation strategies and control activities to prevent breaches of the internal control process and be aware of common examples of conflict of interest, declares any conflict of interest, and understands and advises on how to report any deviations from these principles. For the intermediate level, practitioners must be able to communicate and monitor the use of the internal control framework, as well as ensure management directives to mitigate risk and carry out internal control activities towards the achievement of objectives. They must be able to understand the impact of non-compliance on the organizational behaviors, standards, and values. Practitioners must exemplify compliance in their day-to-day conduct, promoting it in all tasks, and maintain internal reports and guidance documents on standards and business conduct. And they should also update these regularly to ensure compliance. And at the advanced level, practitioners should be able to establish and monitor the quality and use of an effective internal control system, as well as develop a mechanism for ensuring adequate segregation of duties for the function. They must be able to apply standards of business conduct and lead on the identification of key issues and breaches across the function. They should also manage the development of standards of business conduct for retention and disposal. Practitioners must also ensure alignment with these standards and their applications within the public body, as well as ascertain whether the internal control components are present and functioning. So for this area of internal controls, some topics that can be included are internal control policies and procedures, and checks and balances to ensure internal compliance. So the last area under this pillar is the use of standardized forms, essentially disposal forms. Standardized frameworks underpin transparency in information and reduce the potential for inconsistent practices. Here, practitioners should be able to improve the efficiency and effectiveness in the disposal process for public property. So at the basic level, practitioners should have an awareness of the appropriate standardized forms to be utilized for the execution of the disposal process and the ability to complete the forms. At the intermediate level, practitioners must have an understanding of the use of the appropriate standardized forms and the ability to complete, edit, and provide recommendations for improvement to same. Finally, at the advanced level, practitioners must have the knowledge and competency requirements, which involve the ability to understand the standardized disposal forms for approval. They must also have knowledge of compliance and the ability to sensitize and provide training for others in the use of the forms. Also, advanced practitioners must have the ability to develop recommendations for customization of standardized forms and approve relevant modifications in consultation with stakeholders. So for this area, some topics that can be included in developing your modules include drafting and/or editing the retention and disposal forms and templates, and addressing how, why, and when to use the standardized forms and templates. I'll now pass you over to Ms. Roy.
Thank you so much, Laura. We will now take a 5-minute break. And to do this, we place a timer on the screen. When we resume, Laura will continue to take you through the presentation on 5 pillars of retention and disposal. So see you back in 5. All right, and we're back, ladies and gentlemen. So we will continue on with the presentation. So Ms. Laura Tirilla will now take you through 5 pillars of retention and disposal.
Okay, so now we would look at the retention aspect, where pillars 2 and 3 have been combined to capture retention in terms of the significant retention or asset management planning and managing demand. These pillars would focus on the aspects of planning how to manage the total portfolio of significant assets retained and those identified for disposal, as well as planning for individual categories of property, both real and personal property. It also refers to how well demand for assets are managed over their life to optimize performance and realize expected benefits from retention. The policy or special guideline is the first area that falls under this pillar. This area would provide practitioners responsible for policy development with the requirements for developing, same, and the application of good governance principles for retention and disposal of public property. So at the basic level, practitioners must have an understanding of the public body's general procedure and policy as it relates to the retention and disposal and its alignment with the Act. They must understand the basic requirements and the qualities of a good policy or special guideline and be able to conduct and identify best practice research for possible inclusion into said policy or special guideline. At the intermediate level, practitioners must be able to perform the practical steps for developing an effective policy or special guideline and ensure its alignment with the Act, as well as identify the processes and procedures for inclusion in the policy to highlight any discrepancies. Practitioners must decide on the appropriate standardized forms for inclusion into the policy to aid in the successful execution of the process and analyzes the best practice research undertaken for inclusion into the policy or special guideline. And at the advanced level, practitioners must guide the overall policy or special guideline development procedure and formulate advice and recommendations. They must also examine any discrepancies identified and develop solutions to combat same. So for this area, some topics that can be covered are utilizing the OPR's general and special guidelines, policy development, and drafting of policy or special guidelines in relation to retention and disposal of public property. Another area under this pillar is that of risk management, where practitioners can seek to adopt a risk-based approach to maintain and protect the public property, which is both real and personal property, that have been entrusted to the public body. This will ensure that performance is maximized and that the value of the asset is preserved or enhanced through risk management planning. So at the basic level, practitioners must be able to identify the likely risk of personal property of low value being retained and what type of risk they may be exposed to, such as loss, theft, fire, etc. Practitioners must also be able to assess the significance and likelihood of the risk, which is likely to threaten the retention of personal property of low value. They should be able to develop a risk management register for personal property of low value, where the identified risk can be input, and identify mechanisms that can be used to mitigate the identified risk of the personal property. At the intermediate level, practitioners must identify the likely risk of personal property of high value and real property retained, and their level of exposure to risks such as natural disasters, fire, loss, etc. They should be able to conduct preliminary risk analysis by assessing the significance and likelihood of the risk to threaten the retention of personal property of high value and real property. Practitioners must be able to develop a risk management register where the identified risks can be input and recommendations can be made on mechanisms to minimize the disruption of the retention function. And at the advanced level, practitioners must be able to develop approaches to mitigate the impact of risk on the retention functions that can adversely affect the public body. They must monitor all risk management registers and other associated mechanisms to facilitate appropriate actions to minimize disruption and associated costs on the retention function. Practitioners should ensure that all mechanisms and actions taken are in alignment with the Act and regulations and use expert market knowledge gained to analyze and communicate risk management strategies to address potential and emerging risks from external influences. So for this area, some examples of topics that can be included are risk management planning, risk identification and risk analysis, development of risk mitigation strategies, and risk control techniques. The next area under this pillar is public property maintenance planning. This area would allow practitioners with the knowledge and skills required in the maintenance of public property to ensure that they remain in proper working condition and to enhance the property's performance. So at the basic level, practitioners must be able to demonstrate proper record keeping of the public property belonging to the public body in their respective database or asset management system. This would include inputting all past and future maintenance information to be performed, as well as the ability to perform inspection to highlight any issues or immediate action or maintenance that may be required for proper functioning of identified property. At the intermediate level, practitioners should be able to develop and implement a maintenance plan for all public property owned by the public body requiring maintenance. They should also be able to determine the types of maintenance required and evaluate between in-house or outsourced resources to prepare appropriate maintenance strategies. And at the advanced level, practitioners would be able to examine the maintenance plan and make suggestions or recommendations for areas of improvement and inclusion of other pertinent areas not captured. They should evaluate the feasibility of maintenance options using financial tools such as net present value and future value, as well as life cycle costing, and give authorization for maintenance to be performed. So some topics to be covered here could include development of a maintenance plan, personal property maintenance planning, real property maintenance planning. So our next area is personal property management, which would help practitioners to successfully operate in the day-to-day management of personal property, as well as be aware of the practical issues that exist within the retention or management of personal property. So basic level practitioners must be able to understand the record keeping of personal property in the asset or stores and inventory management system, with information from purchasing and receiving documentation, in addition to information gained from a physical inspection of the property. They would also understand the importance of reporting receipts, identification, movement, maintenance, and other areas as it relates to proper asset or property management, and ensure that property is safeguarded and existence is verified. At the intermediate level, practitioners must be able to measure compliance of the asset with established standards, system trends, identification of areas of concern, and highlighting exceptional levels of compliance for each item of personal property. They should also be able to initiate and assemble the structure of the stores and inventory management system. This can be done by providing a logical layout design to facilitate the presentation for interpretation to generate reports, and input information to track accountability, as well as information for depreciation and financial purposes. And lastly, they should identify and document potential issues or challenges. And at the advanced level, practitioners must ensure the assets owned
for which the organization is accountable are adequately controlled, protected, preserved, and maintained to maximize their useful life and provide the best possible return on investment. They should be able to understand the importance of developing an efficient and effective communication strategy for proper property management, as well as address unsolved issues feasibility through development of risk mitigating solutions or strategies and through consultation with subject matter experts. So, for this area, some examples of topics to be included are inventory management and control as it relates to personal property, system of accountability for personal property, and efficient use of personal property.
The next area is real property management, which generally provides practitioners with an understanding of the basic tools, techniques, and knowledge required for effective real property management, as well as the issues that exist within the retention or management of real property. So at the basic level, practitioners must possess an understanding of the key roles and responsibilities in real property management. They must be able to record details of real property owned by the public body in the asset management or stores and inventory management system, along with additional information gained from a physical inspection of the property. At the intermediate level, practitioners must be able to create an asset management plan for each real property owned by the public body, as well as assemble the structure of the property management system, and provide a logical layout design for interpretation to input information. They must also be able to generate effective reports to validate the details of each real property owned by the public body. Such reports should include activity of the property, compliance being met, any loss or damage to the property, and any other detail as it relates to real property management. And at the advanced level, practitioners must ensure that real property for which the organization is accountable for are adequately controlled, protected, preserved, and maintained to maximize their useful life. Practitioners should explore the various methods of valuing property to differentiate among the various methods and best practices, and be able to address and solve issues in the most feasible manner by developing risk mitigation strategies or solutions. So for this area, some examples of topics are laws governing real property, for example, regulations for the disposal of real property to be drafted by the Ministry of Finance, real property maintenance and management, real estate economics and appraisal, and managing lease arrangements. So our next area is stores, warehousing, and distribution management. This area goes hand in hand as warehousing allows for the timely delivery and optimized distribution. Both are very critical within the property management function. Understanding this would allow practitioners to store and dispatch items or property or assets in a way that benefits the organization. And so, practitioners at the basic level must be able to develop the ability to input current and accurate information into a record system or asset management database for the storage, receipt, issuance, and distribution of personal property. Practitioners must understand the different types of storage space that exist within the warehouse for certain types of property. At the intermediate level, practitioners must be able to draft policies and procedures for proper operation and distribution within the warehouse facility, such as property markings, identification, barcoding, distribution channels to be considered, and so on. They should ensure that all property have been accounted for and generate reports to specify the type of property being stored, the type of storage facility, and the type of warehouse facility to be adopted. And at the advanced level, practitioners must oversee the cost of warehousing and distribution as part of the budget process and approve the storage facility to be utilized, the warehouse layout, and all other financial decisions as it relates to the warehouse. They must also be able to provide general oversight of the process and provide approval for significant requests or changes to storage and warehousing and distribution systems. So for this area, some examples of topics to be included are stores and warehouse management, inventory management, stock control methods, stores or warehousing location and layout. Inventory or records management is a critical function of the organization, since well-organized records can help the organization to gain control over documents. Practitioners should be able to apply proper inventory control and record management skills, as well as utilize technology or software programs to manage inventory or property or asset record management throughout its useful life and identification of same for disposal. At the basic level, practitioners must be able to create, store, organize, and maintain the retention and disposal of all public property information in accordance with established procedures, preserve records, and ensure that they are easily accessible and regularly updated. Practitioners must be able to understand and identify the goal and objectives of inventory management within the public body. At the intermediate level, practitioners must identify the mechanisms and techniques for promoting a good document or record management system. They should ensure that the record management system is in compliance with existing legislation, regulation, and standards until they are ready to be disposed and allow practitioners to consider the specific details and type of items or public property to be recorded. And at the advanced level, practitioners must be able to design, initiate, or enforce an effective document management system, electronic or paper-based, undertake regular management of policy, plan, and system review of records. They should also have knowledge of industry concerns and issues related to record keeping in the digital age, digital or information age, and develop strategies for proper management. So some examples of topics for this area include inventory management and control, stores and inventory management system, effective record management, classification, storage, preservation of retention and disposal records, public property or asset portfolio. This area is about the assiduous management of property or asset portfolio that can help improve the property's profitability. And so practitioners can monitor overheads, reduce costs, and allow refinancing, which can enhance the property's performance. Public property or asset portfolio area can help improve the property's profitability. Regular review of a property or asset portfolio is a very important element of property management, especially to aid in timely identification of items requiring disposal. At the basic level, practitioners must be able to develop the capacity to compile the estimated annual spend on all public property owned by the public body. They should be able to identify the categories of public property that are considered significant, that is high value and or high risk, which require greater attention and effort. At the intermediate level, practitioners must be able to compile and analyze the historical spend on public property and use the data to determine strategies to realize short and long-term savings. They must conduct regular assessments of public property portfolios to determine ways property can be enhanced, refurbished, and those that require a high level of maintenance. And at the advanced level, practitioners must ensure that information and organizational processes necessary for the management of the public property portfolio are available and implemented. Practitioners must also review and verify a list of assets identified from the portfolio for disposal and is able to use same to aid in preparation of a disposal plan. So some examples of topics for this area include asset recording and labeling, asset management, and maximizing return on investment. Our last area as it pertains to this section is the annual disposal plan, which is an essential component of sound public property management, since the disposal of public property accounts for significant parts of the full life cycle cost. The practitioner should be able to have an overall understanding of forecast for future public property disposal, cash flow forecast, identifying income associated expenditures, and the stages of disposal planning. At the basic level, practitioners must be able to source information from an asset management system or through physical identification and continue to review property portfolio for identification of any updates on property.
Initially identified for disposals or reporting of any newly discovered items to add to the list of disposals. For the intermediate level, practitioners are required to assess in detail public property identified by the asset strategy as surplus to service delivery requirements and identify opportunities for increasing public property value before their disposal. Practitioners at this level should be able to collate and draft a plan using the research and data provided and submit for review and final approval. And finally, at the advanced level, practitioners would have to contribute to strategic aspects and finalization of the disposal plan and implement the disposal plan and monitor performance. Examples of topics for this area include the stages of disposal planning, completing an annual asset disposal plan. So I'll now hand over to Mr. Marrow.
Thanks so much, Melissa. So because we know this is a lot of information to take in, we want to go into another break just to give you some time to digest. We will put a 5-minute timer again on the, a 10 minutes. We're going into 10 minutes this time. So we'll put a 10-minute timer on the clock and we will see you back in 10, after which we will continue on with the presentation. Welcome back, stakeholders. We now return with Ms. Hiralal, who will take us through pillars number 2 and 3 for disposal. Ms. Hiralal.
Okay, so now we will look at disposal aspect, where pillars 2 and 3 have been combined to capture disposal in terms of the significant disposal planning and managing demand. These pillars will focus on 2 aspects: planning how to manage the total portfolio of significant assets identified for disposal, and planning for individual categories of property, both real and personal. It also refers to how well demand for assets are managed to obtain significant value from disposal. So the first area captured under this pillar is property disposition or placement. Property disposition starts the disposal process and can be defined as the processes involved in the removal of personal property from use. This also includes consideration of the reason for disposal, as well as the preparation of the property for disposal and removal from use. So at the basic level, one should be able to develop a categorized list of goods to be disposed, document the request for disposal and the reason. They must have the ability to understand and identify the hazardous items and intangible property owned by the public body and those that require disposal, ensuring they are properly labeled and marked. At the intermediate level, practitioners must verify items identified for disposal through comparison of physical and system or book records, ensuring their correct location, condition, status, etc. The practitioner should ensure that personnel responsible for handling of hazardous items are provided with the appropriate personal protective equipment (PPE) and ensure that all disposal preparation methods are executed in alignment with the approved strategy. At the advanced level, the practitioner should be able to share knowledge of legal liability and breach of privacy legislation. They should be able to develop and implement appropriate policies and procedures for disposal of hazardous items and intangible property, and gain knowledge of execution process for preparing items for disposal. As such, examples of topics for this area would include steps in the disposition or placement process, handling of special or sensitive or fragile and/or hazardous items, property movement and reutilization principles. The next area is property valuation or appraisal, which can play an important part in the efficient and effective disposal of items. And so, this competence area is where practitioners should have an understanding of executing a valuation of identified property to determine its current value, which is essential to the success of the disposal process. At the basic level, the practitioner should have an understanding of the factors, principles, and implications that may affect the valuation of property for disposal. At the intermediate level, practitioners must be able to determine if an expert valuation is needed and considers acquisition cost, market value, replacement costs, actual physical condition of items, book value, residual value, and so on. At the advanced level, practitioners must deliberate on the appropriate appraised value to determine the minimum sale or bid price and have the ability to compute appraisal of items and generate reports as applicable. So for this area, some examples of topics are valuing or estimating property, principles and requirements of valuation, factors affecting the valuation of property for disposal, and methods of valuation. Another area under this pillar is electronic disposals, in which practitioners should know the order to effectively plan and manage e-auction or forward auctions and how to best use this approach. At the basic level, one must be able to understand the benefits and the different types of electronic disposal methods that exist, especially the e-auction or forward auction concepts and how they work. Practitioners at this level should also be able to develop the ability to identify what type of property should be disposed electronically and be able to use the software chosen for electronic disposal execution. At the intermediate level, the practitioner must ensure and verify that accurate information regarding the disposal is provided. They must work effectively and be able to absorb complex data and communicate same at all levels. And at the advanced level, practitioners must develop expert knowledge in the use of e-disposal tools and be aware of the influences of the use and implementation of e-disposal technology. They must also develop and implement the appropriate policies and procedures for the use of electronic disposal and understand and present complex ideas to both technical and non-technical audiences. And lastly, practitioners must communicate the potential impact of emerging technologies on the public body and individuals. As such, for this area, some examples of topics are types of electronic disposal or e-auction or forward auctions, the benefits and issues as it relates to electronic disposal. Now we move on to the practical issues in disposal. It is important for the practitioner to understand and be able to identify any issues that may arise during or after the execution of the disposal process and address those issues accordingly. This will allow practitioners to improve their own disposal processes. At the basic level, the knowledge and competencies would include the practitioner's ability to conduct research into best practices, as well as contribute to and support improvement of disposal processes. At the intermediate level, a practitioner should be able to have a working knowledge of the issues that exist in disposal, as well as identify and document potential issues or challenges and develop possible risk mitigation solutions or strategies. Advanced level practitioners must develop expert knowledge and understand the issues that exist in disposal. They must also develop and implement mechanisms to prevent issues from occurring, to ensure compliance with the Act, handbook, and guidelines, and apply knowledge gained to address and solve issues in the most feasible manner. So some examples of topics to be included here are issues existed in disposal, ways to combat or mitigate those issues or risks that exist in disposal. Here we move on to disposal methods. Within the competence area of disposal methods, practitioners should have the experience and knowledge to take into consideration all possible methods of disposal and the accompanying procedures for executing each. They should also consider the benefits and costs, as well as the estimated income and expenditure, to aid in selecting the most feasible method that provides the best value for the organization. Basic level practitioners must have general knowledge of the different methods of disposal and have the ability to assess the pros and cons of all disposal method options. At the intermediate level, practitioners must consider procedures for each method of disposal, evaluate and examine all feasible methods of disposal, as well as be able to evaluate the best disposal option by conducting a cost-benefit analysis. And at the advanced level, practitioners must select the preferred and most feasible and cost-effective disposal option, having considered all factors, and be able to develop a disposal strategy report. So an example of topics to be included are understanding and analyzing different methods of disposal, evaluating and selecting the best method of disposal. This area, disposal strategy development, focuses on determining the disposal needs or conditions to meet the items identified for disposal. Hence, a practitioner here should take into account possible conflicting requirements of the various stakeholders, analyzing, documenting, validating, and managing disposal requirements. At the basic level, practitioners must understand the public body's internal handbook and guideline based on disposal. They must also understand the importance of the disposal strategy development report and undertake necessary research to obtain information to support the different disposal methods. At the intermediate level, practitioners must analyze research on the different disposal methods, conduct disposal requirement analysis, execute stakeholder and market analysis, as well as weigh the options of disposal and draft the strategy development report. Practitioners at the advanced level should review the disposal requirement analysis, stakeholder and market analysis, and strategy development report for finalization. So some examples of topics to be included are the functions of the Disposal Committee and Procurement and Disposal Advisory Committee, stages of disposal strategy development process. Within the significant disposal planning, we also have disposal execution. And so to capture that area, disposal action management is seen. A practitioner should be able to identify the significant risk and their treatments to ensure a managed and effective disposal outcome. At the basic level, a practitioner would be able to identify and examine the possible risks that may occur in the disposal process, as well as record keeping of the disposal process with a checklist to ensure completion of all tasks or areas before proceeding with disposal action. At the intermediate level, a practitioner must be able to assess or determine the possible risk management solution for the risk identified in the disposal process and be aware of the challenges encountered in execution of the disposal. And at the advanced level, a practitioner must be able to contribute to the risk management process and provide expert advice and consultation in executing same and manage and execute the approved disposal action. So some examples of topics for this area include executing the approved disposal strategy and risk management solutions for identified risk. I will now hand you over to Ms. Gonda-Joy.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hirala. So stakeholders, at this time, we will take another 5-minute break, but we encourage you during this period to submit any questions to our team, our panel at the OPR, based on the presentations today in the chat section of our Microsoft Teams portal. So you can reflect on the information shared thus far and submit any questions to us. But we'll now take our 5-minute break. Thank you for staying with us, stakeholders. So we'd now like to hand over to Ms. Hirala, who will take us through pillar number 4.
Okay, so we now move on to pillar 4, which is performance management. This pillar is based on the collection, collation, and analysis of information on targets set and results achieved, as well as its application to support good retention and disposal performance. Those targets or results to be achieved should be set based on the SMART criteria, which guide in setting goals and objectives. The SMART criteria refers to those goals or objectives that are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. The first area, performance measurement and management, is key to assist the practitioner in managing the outputs, deliverables, and key performance indicators of a public body's performance and executing the retention and disposal of public property function. Public bodies and practitioners should utilize the SMART criteria in development of their deliverables and key performance indicators or KPIs. At the basic level, practitioners must be able to collate and provide details for specific reporting in relation to the applicable aspect of the legislation, that is the Act and regulations, as well as the handbooks and guidelines for retention of public property and disposal of personal property. They should also be able to identify any performance gaps and trends in retention and disposal reports and make preliminary recommendations or suggestions for improvement of same. At the intermediate level, practitioners should undertake performance monitoring, provide guidance through data collection, and gathering and time management of individual performance through agreed objectives. They should also play a significant role in the performance measurement against targets and create improvement plans where necessary, and prepare improvement reports for the area based on the applicable legislation, handbook, and guidelines. And a practitioner at the advanced level must proactively drive, support, and endorse performance management practices. They must be instrumental in developing retention and disposal strategies, setting of targets and indicators for the public body, according and is highly experienced in identifying and negotiating milestones and monitoring performance, as well as they should provide a strong focus on quality, on-time delivery of retention and disposal activity, and report on all these elements to senior management and other stakeholders. So some examples of topics here are the concept and importance of value for money from disposal, the use of key performance indicators, the use of the SMART technique, and performance management tools and approaches. The final area under Pillar 4 is the implementation of appropriate continuous improvement methodologies, which is fundamentally important for practitioners to undertake root cause analysis, assess opportunities and appraisal options, which can contribute to cost savings and improved value. So at the basic level, practitioners must identify problems relating to ineffective retention and disposal processes and practices by collecting data and monitoring performance. They must monitor compliance with current practices and identify areas of improvement for unachievable performance standards, as well as evaluate lessons learned and communicate same to stakeholders. Practitioners at the intermediate level should be able to identify and practice ways of delivering value through effective and improved retention and disposal of public property processes through cost and quality. They must also be able to research and create benchmarks of processes or performance of the public body's retention and disposal function, and set up forums and mechanisms for continuous feedback, as well as review recommendations for improvement on a frequent basis as a way of producing change. And at the advanced level, practitioners should develop a culture of continuous improvement and devise root cause analysis to evaluate problems experienced and apply strategic methods for the development of improvement plans. So for this area, some examples of topics are the Six Sigma tools and techniques for process improvement and theories of constraint and how to identify constraints. We now look at the last pillar that make up the competence framework for the retention and disposal of public property, and that is people, which is a very important pillar that refers to the staff resources undertaking retention and disposal activities, including people development and staff expertise. So the first area under this pillar is stakeholder relationship management, in which practitioners can identify situations and interactions where specific relationship management methods may be applied to improve the contribution of the retention and disposal function. Practitioners are required to have an in-depth understanding of complex customer and stakeholder relationships. Managing expectations through a control process ensures credibility, buy-in, and support. At the basic level, practitioners are required to develop and maintain relationships through effective communications with internal and external stakeholders to promote effective retention and disposal processes. They should advise stakeholders on the interpretation of internal handbooks and guidelines for retention and disposal, and offer routine advice to internal stakeholders on related issues. At the intermediate level, practitioners must monitor the work of internal stakeholders to ensure that they understand and comply with requirements and promote the work of retention and disposal from a position of influence to internal stakeholders across the public body. They should also motivate colleagues and other internal stakeholders to achieve their commitment to the work of the job function. Practitioners can contribute to the development of special guidelines that represent retention and disposal application, whilst liaising with internal and external stakeholders to develop networks, strategies, and plans for management and implementation of same. And at the advanced level, practitioners must be interpersonally savvy and relate well to all types of people, both inside and outside of the public body, and build effective relationships, which are constructive and appropriate for their purpose. They should also manage the expectations of the relationship through a controlled process and identify a range of situations through interaction for providing consultant and counseling advice. Practitioners can further adopt the appropriate interpersonal style and can use negotiation strategies as applicable to evaluate stakeholder plans to achieve effective retention and disposal, and create communication plans to achieve the buy-in for asset management and disposal plans by internal and external stakeholders. So some examples of topics for this area include how to engage with internal and external stakeholders and stakeholder relationship management techniques. The last area under Pillar 5 looks at effective communication. Within this competence area, practitioners should possess effective communication that can help build their credibility and that of the organization, hence raising the profile of the retention and disposal function. So at the basic level, the practitioner must be able to create well-written correspondence on behalf of the team under guidance and be a good communicator and experienced in using multiple communication methods. They should be able to engage and interact in meetings and discussions and provide input as required, as well as demonstrate good listening skills and respond appropriately. Practitioners must share appropriate work-related information and be able to present data in an effective and meaningful way for use by others in the public body. Practitioners at the intermediate level should understand the importance of well-written communications and require limited verification of work. They must provide guidance on written correspondence as required and present well-structured, precise information, as well as be an effective presenter who can read the audience's behavior and position and adapt style accordingly. They should know when to listen and can ask questions to clarify understanding, as well as identify and maintain information flows and contacts with colleagues who depend on them or who influence their work. And at the advanced level, practitioners must be a consummate communicator who is able to adapt to the audience as and when necessary. They should continually foster and encourage new and different ways of communication, as well as use expert language in written communications with all levels and across the public sector. They should also issue written communications that impact on strategic operations or influences the direction of retention of public property activities. So for this area, some examples of topics include applying retention and disposal principles in various communications, impactful communication tools, effective writing skills, and public speaking. So now let's look at the way forward. The professionalization of the retention and disposal function is a strategic lever for improved outcomes. Having the right combination of skills and competencies can reduce costs, deliver value for money, and drive ethical and sustainable outcomes in the changing business environment. To achieve the desired outcome for retention and disposal by the reform program, there is a need for greater commitment to the development of retention and disposal capacity across public bodies, with the backing of the relevant human resource professionals to support its organization by acquiring the right people with the appropriate skills, knowledge, and competencies. We have now come to the end of our presentation of the training standard, competence level, and certification requirements for the areas of retention and disposal. I now hand you over to Ms. Ramkumar Singh, who would give a brief introduction into the OPR's learning management system at this point, which would aid in capacity building for this area.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hiral, and good morning to everyone. The OPR would have briefly introduced its learning management system in September of 2021 when we rolled out the training standards, competence levels, and certification requirements for public procurement. I will now provide you with some additional details about the OPR's learning management system. So the OPR recently acquired a learning management system, or LMS. The OPR's LMS is expected to provide a new learning experience for local and foreign suppliers or contractors, local public bodies, and the staff of the OPR. It will provide interactive content relating to the Act, the regulations, handbooks and guidelines, systems, policies, procedures, and processes. So what is a learning management system? A learning management system, or LMS, is a web-based software application that automates training, administers assessments, tracks and collates reports on the performance of learners. So how will the OPR's LMS function? The OPR will develop and upload content in the LMS relating to the 4 stages of public procurement proceedings and the retention and disposal process. Users will have access to this content and be able to review it on demand. For instance, once content is uploaded, learners who may be named procurement officers, accounting officers, human resource officers, or even suppliers or contractors will be provided with usernames and passwords to access the system. The OPR will monitor the progress of learners, and once a learner has successfully completed the training modules by attaining the passing score, certificates of participation would be issued by the OPR. The OPR envisages that this platform will transform its capacity building interventions by enabling us to better serve our stakeholders through the delivery of mobile-friendly content that is accessible on demand, thus improving availability. From a monitoring perspective, the platform will assist the OPR in tracking and reporting on the progress of its learners, allowing us to target our interventions where it is needed most. Through this learning management platform, LMS platform, the OPR will be revolutionizing the delivery of its capacity building program. Now let's look at the benefits of the OPR's LMS. The LMS allows for all e-learning materials to be stored in one location, a cloud-based system. This reduces the risk of losing important data. The LMS provides access to the e-learning materials on public procurement, retention and disposal of public property at any time on any device. Once the OPR uploads course materials onto the LMS and publishes these materials, learners can access them. Even those who are on the go can log in to the e-learning platform via their smartphones and tablets, so you don't have to wait until your next online training session to access the material. The LMS can easily track learner progress and performance. The LMS gives the OPR the ability to keep track of learner progress and allows learners the ability to track their own progress to ensure that they are meeting their targets. The LMS also includes a reporting and analytics feature that allows the OPR to pinpoint areas that require additional work, as well as areas where learners are excelling. For instance, if learners are struggling with a particular lesson, we can assess the e-learning content and make modifications if necessary. The LMS reduces training and development costs. The OPR's LMS allows learners to access their training online, which means that a sizable sum of training and development costs can be reduced. For instance, the cost of printing and booking a venue, since the training material will now be available on the LMS platform. A learning management system can even reduce online training and development time. It gives learners only the information they need in a direct and organized manner, and this information can be accessed at a convenient time, allowing them to simply click on the online modules they need and complete the material in a fraction of the time. The LMS also allows the OPR to test our learners' knowledge with our quizzes, assessments, and interactive projects. Finally, the LMS allows public bodies and suppliers or contractors to stay up to date with current procurement regulations. In this way, the OPR's LMS is an invaluable tool. So in closing, let us look at the status of implementing the OPR's LMS. The OPR is continuously creating and uploading content onto the LMS. In November of 2022, the OPR commenced a pilot test with our internal stakeholders to ensure that there are no issues in preparation for launch to public bodies. And during this year, the OPR will be launching the LMS to public bodies. This now brings me to the end of my presentation.